It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mike Tidwell. And you have a nice bio of Mike in your program, and I'll let you go there to read about some of the books that he's written, writer and citizen activist, but I thought I'd personalize this just a bit. When I returned from the Peace Corps in 1993 from Gabon, many of you know that re-entry can take a little while, find your feet, and I certainly wanted to be close to family when I came home, and I spent about a year in my hometown in Oklahoma, and it was a year of real reconnecting with my family, but also a year of struggle with trying to figure out how to tell that story back home and who to connect with. And one of the books that kind of helped me in that process was Mike's book, The Ponds of Kalambayi, which has just been reissued. And a great story of his years in Zaire working with the fish program. And, you know, any RPCV writer's dream would be to have the cover say, "A True Masterwork" by Sergeant Shriver's review. So you got a Sarge review there. So The Ponds of Kalambayi is by Mike, is one of the really poignant Peace Corps memoirs. Fast forward a few years, I found myself working at the Shriver Center that Sarge and Eunice founded in Maryland, where they were living, and working with a program for returned Peace Corps volunteers that were in graduate school, part of the fellows programs. And not long after I settled into that work, I heard Mike Tidwell come on a radio program talking about global warming, climate change. And I thought, is this the Mike Tidwell that wrote Ponds of Kalambayi? Anyway, just right after, I kind of cold called him and said, "Mike, I think you wrote this book that was very helpful to me, but now I'm running a program and I think we should work together." And so for the past decade, it's been a real privilege to work with him with the Chesapeake Climate Action Network that he founded and led. And Mike is someone who's really, he was thinking about this issue and its global impact long before it became a mainstream issue. And he's probably going to tell us some of those stories. Mike he's all in. He's a citizen activist, an advocate, a great writer who's written a number of books, so his voice comes through print as well as from stages like this. Now, I'll warn you, Mike is a doer, and he's going to want to get you involved. And I'll just tell you, be careful. Be a little careful. One of the ways Mike's gotten me involved is he's had me jumping into the frozen Chesapeake Bay for the last 8 Januaries, as he leads the polar plunge to keep winter cold. And this last year, we were in just outside of D.C., and the polar plunge was set. We were set to jump into the Potomac in the National Harbor, and I took a group down and drove up to the site, and it was so cold. And we pulled in, and the river, you know, the Potomac was completely frozen over. And I kind of had a moment of like, oh, good, we're going to go home, you know. Dang, Mike and his crew were down there with a sledgehammer and a pick. Dang if they didn't, for 2 hours, open a hole in the Potomac for us to run and jump into. So Mike's all in. He's all in on this, and it's great to call him a friend. It's just such important work that I think he's involved in, and I think he's going to tell us about how it ties in with his experience as a Peace Corps volunteer. You know, Mike, for me, exemplifies that Frederick Douglass quote where he says, "Agitate, agitate, agitate." Mike's a natural agitator, and it's my privilege to introduce him and have him come up and be our next speaker. Mike?
Thank you, Joby. Thank all of y'all for having me. What an amazing place. It's good to be back in Tennessee. I was actually born in this state, in Memphis, but I've never really spent much time in Nashville, and just the last 24 hours have been amazing. It's really amazing, all the sense of history in this town. Here we are in the Hall of Fame. This morning, with my wife and I, we were touring the Johnny Cash Museum and seeing all those country western black and white photographs and photographs of Johnny Cash picking cotton as a kid. And it reminds me of the writer L.P. Hartley's quote, who said, "The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there." And it's true, right? And then on top of that, we were Peace Corps volunteers in a literal foreign country in the past. And so when we come together to share our stories, it feels doubly exotic. I want to thank Jonathan Pearson and Glenn and the whole MPCA crew, and they have worked really, really hard, and I think we should all give them a round of applause for putting together this great conference. You know, speaking of Peace Corps memories, one of the most memorable for me was early in my Peace Corps experience as a fisheries volunteer. I had a Yamaha 125 dirt bike, and I would go in these rural villages in the Congo. And there was this one farmer who stopped me one day and he said, "Come to my house on Saturday morning and I want to show you where there's a stream where maybe we can do some fish ponds." So that Saturday morning I showed up about 7 in the morning, really early in the morning, and every hut looked exactly the same in this village. It was early in the morning. I was still a little groggy. I'm trying to find this guy's house. His name is Kabamba. I can't find his house. I see these old men in the distance walking. Older gentlemen with white hair, 2 village elders just walking, side by side like this along the trail. And I pull up my motorcycle, my rumbling motorcycle with this banana yellow crash helmet, my riding gloves, my jean jacket, my goggles. And I don't even bother to turn the motorcycle off. And I just pull up to these 2 elders and I yell above the motorcycle sound. I said, "Do you know where Kabamba lives?" And they just looked at me appropriately like I was a foreign alien, and then looked at each other, and then looked back at me again and said, "Good morning to you too." And I was just, flooded appropriately with shame, and I'd been put in my place. And I just remember that experience so much because it began the 2-year experience for me as a Peace Corps volunteer that people matter. People matter. Connections to people, what people see and feel and their interactions with each other. Life is on a human scale when we live in these foreign villages. And it was a great message that I know that we all take back from our Peace Corps experience. And I've kept that as I came back to the States. Even now today, I can't talk to a bank teller without saying, "Hello, how are you? How's your family?" But it's also brought me back to the States to be, it helped me be a social and environmental organizer for environmental justice and social justice, because I know that people really do matter, and that we really are charged with making the world better for each other and future generations. But I also wonder, as an American, does our country operate on the world stage as if people really matter? Peace Corps has been great, but that's just 200,000 of us, right? As a nation as a whole, do we really operate on the world stage as if people really matter? John F. Kennedy's original vision for Peace Corps was, that there was this solution nation, right? The United States. We had the technology. We had the wealth. We were the solution nation, and we would send volunteers off to the problem nations, to the poor nations, and transfer some of that wealth, some of that technology. A little bit of a paternalistic Cold War view, but still, we're so proud. I'm so personally proud to be one of the 200,000 plus Americans who've served in the Peace Corps all over the world. And because of us, because of John F. Kennedy, there are millions of people around the world who are just a little bit better fed, a little bit better educated, a little bit better sheltered and clothed because of the work that we did. And I'm enormously proud to have been part of that experience. But the problem is that over these last 50 years, the United States of America has begun to gradually and now rapidly transition away on the world stage from the solution nation to become really the problem nation. We have become the problem nation for every village any of us ever served in overseas. And I just want to delve into that just for a second. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Zaire, and a little part of Zaire called Kalambayi. And in this poor part of the world, as in many countries where you served as Peace Corps volunteers, the seasons, the coming and going of the seasons mattered enormously. Every summer, the summer months of June, July, and August, it would get really dry in this part of the central Congo. And that's when the hunting happened, and the grasslands would die off, and there would be these controlled burns with dogs and spears, and the village would capture maybe half of their annual protein through this hunting that was associated with the dry season, made possible by the dry season. And then after that, in September, the rains would come back, and people would plant, and there would be a fall crop. Very important, the cassava, the corn. The grains would come on time in September. And then in January, there would be a second rainy season, and you would plant a second time. And this is how the whole culture, the whole life was dependent on these seasons. But now I get letters from people I knew in these villages who send me letters who tell me how much the seasons are changing in the Congo. How in the summer of 2010, there was no dry season. It just unthinkably rained the entire dry season. And in January of 2011, the rains didn't come at all. And what this means when these seasons change in a place as, of sustainable agriculture or subsistence agriculture like Zaire, what these changing seasons mean is hunger, period. It's just a direct route from changing seasons to hungry children, a direct line. And we know that, those of us who've served overseas, and we've seen the importance of people who live close to the land and survive through the changes in the seasons. And we know that the weather's changing not just in the Congo, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer, it's changing all over the world. Wherever you go on the planet, it's too wet, too dry, too cold, too hot. There's no normal. In Nashville, I think it was 2011, a 1,000-year flood struck this city. Titan Stadium flooded. Unbelievable flooding and changes in rain patterns happening all over the world. And of course, we know what this is all related to. We know that it's driven by global climate change. California, record drought, unbelievable drought right now, and wildfires. Everywhere you go, too hot, too dry, too wet, too cold. And it's getting worse. This climate change is intensifying. All kinds of studies have come out just this year from international scientists, from the U.S. government itself, that this is getting much, much worse. And we know what's causing it worldwide. It's our use of oil, coal, and natural gas. The fossil fuels, when you burn them, an odorless, invisible gas, carbon dioxide migrates to the atmosphere, stays up there for about 100 years, and traps heat. Now, here's where Kennedy's old vision of the United States as a solution nation begins to get flipped on its head. And that's because we in the United States are the biggest drivers of global climate change, bar none. We emit per capita 15 times more carbon pollution than the people who live in Guatemala. 50 times more carbon per capita than people who live in Laos. 175 times more carbon than the people who live in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer. In fact, in the village that I lived in Kalambayi and Zaire, completely innocent people in terms of driving global warming. In this village, it wasn't a question of clean wind-powered electricity versus dirty coal-fired electricity. These people didn't have electricity. It wasn't a question of gas-guzzling SUV versus, hybrid Prius. These people didn't have cars. As a continent, Africa generates a small fraction of the greenhouse gases that are driving global warming, yet this continent is being walloped right now as we speak by changing seasons that make children hungry, connected to climate change, which is driven by carbon pollution, which is coming overwhelmingly as a leader from the United States. In the United States, we have 5% of the world's population, yet we generate 25% of the world's greenhouse gases. Now, in a perfect world, if the world were really fair, the United States of America would get 25% of all the world's warming right down on our country, just telescoped right down on top of us, right? That would be fair. And if we got that much of the world's warming right on top of our country, then our economy would already be wrecked. Florida would already be a series of islands. Kansas would already be a scrub desert. But since we can share the warming with Bangladesh, and share it with South Pacific Island nations that are literally disappearing from sea level rise, and share the warming with the people of Kalambayi in the village I lived in Zaire, then we don't seem to get too worked up about it. And I submit to you that this is utterly and totally and absolutely morally unacceptable, that we are knowingly causing climate change. We are knowingly using and continuing to depend on fossil fuels that are changing the seasons, where I was a Peace Corps volunteer, where you were a Peace Corps volunteer, and directly leading to hunger and suffering, that we are becoming as a nation the worst nightmare of every village that any of us ever served in. And we need to change that. And we need to change it in a hurry. We need to switch to clean, renewable energy. Yes, we've made a start, but we are not going nearly fast enough. We've got to switch to wind power, switch to solar power. And the good news is we don't need a magic bullet to do it. You know, we don't need anything to make this clean energy revolution happen that we don't already have. We're in possession of all the technology, everything that we need to make it happen. Nobody has to invent anything new. Iowa, the state of Iowa already gets a quarter, 25% of its electricity from wind power. And I was in Chicago just this week, and it's amazing how much the city of Chicago has made the switch increasingly to solar energy throughout that city. So what's the problem? The problem is in this nation as a whole, in the United States, we don't have a policy to make this happen. Now, let's just remember another big program of John F. Kennedy's, right? The moonshot. The trip to the moon. In 1961, John F. Kennedy said, we're going to the moon, we're going to put a human being, we're going to put an American on the moon before the end of this decade. Now, when he said that, we didn't have the technology to do it. We didn't have the rockets. We didn't have the computer systems to make that flight to the moon possible. But we still did it. We met the deadline. So we didn't have the technology, but we had a policy. We had a goal, and we got there. Now think about this. Today, with climate change, it's completely the opposite. We have all the technology we need. We have everything we need to solve this problem. We just don't have a policy. We do not have a national policy to get serious about fighting global climate change. And that's what we as former Peace Corps volunteers need to dedicate ourselves to. We've got to get policies. We've got to get policies at the state level. Here in Tennessee, whatever state you're from, if your state doesn't have a policy of mandatory clean energy, work hard to make it happen. If your state already has a policy to fight climate change with clean energy, work to make it bigger and better and strengthen it even more. That's why I formed my group 12 years ago, the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, to push my state in Maryland and also the state of Virginia and DC and the Mid-Atlantic to go harder and faster on clean energy and to fight dirty fossil fuels. That's why I'm wearing this sticker right here. It says, no Cove Point gas exports. Because as fast as we're moving toward wind and solar in parts of our country, there are polluting industries who want to deny the reality of climate change and want to push for more and more fossil fuels. You've heard of the Keystone XL pipeline, a complete disaster of an idea to pipe tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada, liquefy it, send it all the way to the Gulf Coast of Texas, put it on ships and send it around the world at a carbon intensity even worse than oil that comes out of the Gulf of Mexico. It is ridiculous that in a world of rapid global warming, where the seasons are changing not only here in Nashville, but all over the world where we were Peace Corps volunteers, that we're even talking about something called the Keystone XL pipeline. In the same way, a company called Dominion wants to put a gas pipeline and liquefy fracked gas from that controversial drilling process called fracking, liquefy it in my state on the Chesapeake Bay and send it all the way to India and Japan at a carbon intensity higher than if people in India and Japan burn coal. It is worse. It goes in the wrong direction. And we're told instead that it is a solution to climate change when it is the opposite. So we need to get involved. We've waited way too long. We've waited way too long to get going. The president is talking more about climate change. He's taken some positive steps on automobile efficiency. He just came out with a carbon rule the EPA did to force dirty power plants to reduce their emissions, but that rule is not strong enough. We need to strengthen it. We need to go faster. We need to tell the president, this is your legacy issue, and you need to do more. Now, a lot of people, as Joby said, I'm a campaigner. I'm obsessed with climate change. I talk about it, I breathe it, I sleep it. This is what I do, and I'm constantly campaigning. And people come up to me all the time and they say, okay, Mike, I get it. You've made the case. I agree with you. The weather's changing in my backyard. I've seen amazing things just in recent years. I read the newspapers. I know how bad it is, but I'm also busy. I got 3 kids. I got choir practice. I got to pick up kids from soccer. I'm busy, busy, busy. Don't give me 10 things to do. Tell me what is the most important thing. What's one thing I can do? And the answer I would give you is pick a group. Pick one organization that you know is fighting against climate change and get on their email alert list. Develop a relationship with one group so that you're regularly getting their emails. You know, there's a great group nationally called 350.org. I know many of you know who they are, founded by my friend Bill McKibben. 350.org, this group is fighting the Keystone XL pipeline. They are great campaigners nationwide. Go to 350.org, get on their email alert list. We're going to have a giant rally in New York in September. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of people there. There are all other things that you can do to fight the Keystone XL pipeline, to send the president messages. Join that group. Or regionally, any of you live in Maryland, Virginia, or DC? Raise your hand. ChesapeakeClimate.org. That's my group. ChesapeakeClimate.org. Just get on the email list, and we will keep you updated on what's happening in Richmond, what's happening in Annapolis, what's happening on Capitol Hill, and what you can do to stop this Cove Point gas export facility. July 13th, there's going to be a big rally in Washington, D.C. I hope that if you're from Maryland, Virginia, D.C., that you'll come to the U.S. Capitol and be part of that rally. So listen, I'm going to close by saying this. Climate change is the most important thing. It really is. I don't like to go in front of people and other campaigners and say, my issue is more important than your issue. Whatever your issue is, AIDS in Africa, whatever it is. I'm not saying that my issue or this issue is more important than yours. This is what I'm saying, however. We could cure cancer tomorrow. Our greatest health fantasy in 10,000 years of civilization, our greatest health fear, cure cancer tomorrow. And if we did that tomorrow, but we did not solve climate change, we will not have health. We will have violence. We will have malnutrition. We will have spreading malaria, sea level rise. We will not have good health if we don't solve the issue of climate change. We could end warfare tomorrow. Just erase hate from every heart on the planet, right? No more hate in anybody's heart all over the world. And therefore, without hate, you can't have war. You know, you can't have what anthropologists call organized intergroup homicide is over because nobody hates each other. And we could disband the Pentagon. No more wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We could do that tomorrow. Yet if we do not solve the crisis of climate change, we will not have peace. We will have Katrina and Rita and Wilma and Hurricane Sandy summer after summer. We will not have peace. We will have violence. We will have collapsing agricultural systems. We will have more and more nation-state conflict over disruptions from climate change. So we have to solve this issue. We have to get involved. And the good news is that the multiplier benefits of clean energy that will solve climate change bring so many other benefits. Again, no more wars for oil, no more childhood asthma, no more code red smog days in the cities where you live. You know, no more escalating energy prices. All of these things are good for us. So I just want to close by reading a paragraph from my book in the new edition that came out in 2011 on the 50th anniversary of the Peace Corps. It's time to resurrect JFK's original vision by becoming a solution nation again. As a young man, I thought I had to go overseas to help the world's poorest people. That strategy produced a few fish ponds in Africa and some really, really great memories. But today, as my hair grays and the years pile on, I know I can best serve the people of Zaire by working hard right here where I was born. Today, my Peace Corps experience, described in my book and some here today, has led me to actually push harder in the fight for electric cars and solar panels all across America and for wind farms along our coastlines. We are in a race against time, to be sure, to cut carbon pollution fast enough so we can save our planet. But we're picking up speed, that's the good news, and I'm optimistic because here's what I know. If the past is a foreign country, so is the future. People will do things differently there. Thank you very much. Thank you. And get involved. See me at the reception today, and I'll have all kinds of propaganda for you to take next steps. Thank you.